Have you ever wondered what happens when love collides with royal tradition, when emotion faces centuries of power and protocol? Because that's exactly what's unfolding behind the gates of Buckingham Palace right now. A quiet but vicious war that's splitting the House of Windsor in two. Prince Harry, the rebellious son who once said he wanted nothing more to do with the firm, is now fighting tooth and nail for something that could change royal history: Meghan Markle's inheritance. But here's the catch. The assets he's fighting for aren't even technically hers. And that's what makes this story so shocking. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this: King Charles, already frail from recent health battles, summoning his most trusted advisors late one night. Documents are spread across his desk: wills, estate records, handwritten letters from the Queen herself. And then, with a trembling pen, he draws a line through a name. Not a servant's name, not an advisor's, but his own son's. Yes, Prince Harry's name. That single stroke set off an earthquake inside the royal family, one that even the late Queen might never have imagined. And at the center of it all, two women. One, Meghan Markle, the woman Harry risked everything for. The other, Princess Catherine, the woman who quietly became the symbol of the monarchy's survival. But why now? Why this battle, when King Charles's health is hanging by a thread and the monarchy itself is under unprecedented scrutiny? And most of all, why are Princess Anne and the King so determined to keep every royal penny, estate, and heirloom out of Meghan's reach? This isn't just about money. It's about revenge, redemption, and the struggle for legacy. Because according to insiders, the inheritance at stake isn't just financial. It includes royal estates once promised privately to Harry and Meghan as part of their independent future. And now, those promises are being ripped apart, one signature at a time. Let's rewind for a moment. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family in 2020, they weren't just walking away from royal duties. They were walking away from the system, from centuries of control, from palaces built on tradition, and from the financial lifeline that kept the Windsors in power. In the years that followed, they built their own empire: deals with Netflix, Spotify, fashion collaborations, charity ventures. But as those ventures crumbled one by one, whispers began circulating in London's private clubs. Whispers that Meghan's future stability might depend on assets she believed were rightfully hers. Assets tied to Diana's inheritance, royal jewelry, and private trusts once managed in her husband's name. And then came the letter. A sealed letter from King Charles to his legal counsel, reportedly confirming changes to the royal inheritance plan. Sources close to the palace say the letter contained a clear directive that certain estates, jewels, and funds previously associated with Harry and Meghan were to be permanently reassigned to Princess Catherine. Why? Because, according to the king, she best represents the enduring values of the crown. That phrase alone sent shockwaves through royal watchers. Enduring values of the crown? It sounded less like a compliment and more like a coded message. Some saw it as a slap in the face to Meghan. Others saw it as a preemptive strike, a royal insurance policy to keep wealth within the direct line of succession, away from the couple who chose to walk away. And then there's Princess Anne, the no-nonsense royal who has never chased headlines but always guarded the monarchy's traditions like a hawk. She reportedly told aides, "If you leave the family, you leave the benefits. You can't have it both ways." Harsh. Maybe. But very, very in. Still, behind the scenes, things were far from simple. Because Harry didn't take it quietly. In fact, his reaction, according to palace insiders, was explosive. He believed his father's actions were personal, an attempt to punish him for his loyalty to Meghan. He saw it not as a matter of royal finance, but of betrayal. And perhaps the most painful twist? For years, Harry had believed that part of his late mother's jewelry collection, particularly pieces she'd worn in her final years, would one day belong to Meghan. He viewed it as symbolic, a continuation of Diana's defiance against the royal machine. But now, those pieces were quietly reassigned to Catherine, including a necklace Diana once called her shield. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for Harry? To see the same institution that hounded his mother now reclaiming the last physical traces of her, and giving them to the very woman who represents the life he walked away from? And here's where it gets even more complicated. Some sources claim that before his health worsened, King Charles made a confidential agreement with his daughter, princess, and to ensure that certain royal estates would never pass outside the direct line, meaning William and Catherine's family. That includes properties and private accounts in Scotland and Cornwall. Essentially, it locked Harry out forever. But why would Charles do that to his own son? Was it about loyalty to the institution, or fear of what could happen if royal assets fell under Meghan's control in the United States? After all, royal wealth isn't just about luxury. It's about influence. It's about who owns the legacy of the monarchy itself. And according to one former royal aide, Charles feared that Meghan's growing independence, her ventures, her Hollywood connections, could turn that legacy into a brand. And in the monarchy's eyes, nothing could be more dangerous than the royal family becoming someone's brand. Still, what no one expected was just how far Harry would go to fight back. He reportedly began challenging some of his father's decisions, seeking legal advice from outside the UK, even exploring ways to question the legitimacy of certain royal trusts. That's right. The once carefree prince who turned his back on royal protocol was now studying inheritance law. It's ironic, isn't it? The man who walked away from royal privilege now clawing to protect it. Not for himself, but for the woman he loves. But that's what makes this story so deeply human. Love, resentment, guilt, and legacy, all tangled together under a crown. Even some royal insiders admit that the emotional divide runs deeper than ever. One aide allegedly described a recent phone call between Charles and Harry as tense, tearful, and final. Charles reportedly told his son, "The monarchy survives by discipline, not by emotion." Harry's response, "Then maybe that's why it's dying." Painful words, but words that echo the larger truth. The crown is not just losing its unity, it's losing its soul. And as the inheritance war escalates, the public's reaction has been equally divided. Some see Harry and Meghan as victims of a system determined to erase them. Others argue they made their choice, and this is simply consequence. But the real question, the one that has royal watchers glued to every whisper, is this: what exactly is the inheritance Meghan is fighting for? And what hidden documents could prove whether she was ever meant to receive it in the first place? Because insiders say there's more. That deep within royal archives, a set of private agreements exists, ones drawn up shortly after the Queen's passing. Agreements that might expose what Meghan was promised during the couple's turbulent exit negotiations. If true, it could explain why King Charles and Princess Anne are so adamant about keeping things locked down. Because those documents could reveal promises the palace now wants erased. And if that's the case, then this isn't just a family feud, it's a cover-up. Think about it. A frail king, a divided family, a son seeking redemption, a daughter-in-law fighting for recognition, a sister protecting the monarchy, and a daughter-in-law in waiting, Princess Catherine, suddenly holding more power than ever before. This isn't just another royal scandal. This is the monarchy's deepest fear coming to life, that the past they tried to bury, the guilt over Diana, the wounds from Megxit, the divide between duty and love, has finally come back to haunt them. And the inheritance battle? It's just the fuse. Because if the whispers are true, if Meghan really does have proof of old agreements or letters suggesting she was once promised access to royal assets, then what's unfolding now could shake the monarchy to its foundation. As one insider chillingly put it, the truth isn't about who gets what. It's about who deserves to be royal. But even that's not the end of it. Because behind closed doors, something else has begun, a secret investigation into the origins of those very assets. According to reports, financial advisors close to the crown have been re-examining the flow of funds tied to the estates Meghan once referenced in private interviews. Why would they do that now? Unless they were preparing to defend themselves against a potential legal claim? And if Harry's determined to fight, if he truly believes Meghan was wronged, then what comes next could be the first royal inheritance lawsuit in modern history. Can you imagine what that would mean? The son of a reigning monarch taking his own father to court over money, loyalty, and love? Even Princess Anne reportedly said in private, if he does this, it will finish him. But if we've learned anything about Harry, it's that he's not afraid of being finished, only of being forgotten. And as the walls close in and the king's health worsens, one question looms larger than ever. Will Harry walk away again? Or will he burn what's left of the royal bridge to protect Meghan's legacy? Because according to a royal source close to Clarence House, the king has already made his final decision. And that decision will shock everyone. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. They say the crown never truly sleeps, that even in silence, its secrets are writing themselves into history. But on one cold night inside Clarence's house, as the lamps dimmed and aides were dismissed, King Charles allegedly made a decision that would shake the royal family to its core. Picture this: an aging monarch sitting at his mahogany desk, a half-empty glass of scotch beside him, and a stack of aged parchment documents sealed with crimson wax. His breathing is slow, steady, but his mind is racing. The weight of 1,000 years of monarchy rests on his shoulders. And tonight, he's not just a father. He's the guardian of a kingdom's legacy. What could compel a father to rewrite his will? Not to secure his children's future, but to divide them forever. Because that's exactly what insiders claim King Charles did. In secret, without consulting Harry, without even warning William. It began, according to multiple palace sources, after a private consultation with senior advisors and the royal solicitor. The king had become increasingly anxious about the future of royal assets, particularly estates tied to the Duchy of Cornwall, the Crown Estate, and certain private family holdings long rumored to contain Diana's jewelry and trust-linked investments. And in that confidential meeting, Charles reportedly declared, "Nothing must leave the royal circle again." On the surface, it sounds like a policy decision. But those 6 words carried a darker undertone, a warning. Because the royal circle no longer included Harry and Meghan. Imagine how personal that must have felt. To a man already branded the spare, already cast aside by the family hierarchy, learning that even the legacy he thought was his birthright was being quietly redirected away from him, toward his brother's family. What's even more fascinating is how Charles went about it. Unlike previous monarchs, who made their will public after death, Charles allegedly prepared a sealed directive, a confidential will accessible only to 3 people: the Lord Chamberlain, his private secretary, and Princess Anne. Princess and his confidant, his rock, his executioner of family order. Insiders say it was Anne who advised Charles to make the directive watertight. She insisted that royal inheritance should never be exposed to potential U.S. legal scrutiny. Translation: keep it out of Meghan's reach. One former aide put it bluntly. The king trusted Anne more than anyone. She's his firewall. But why the sudden urgency? Why the secrecy? Whispers around Buckingham Palace point to a triggering moment. A late-night call from California. A call from Harry. According to accounts leaked to the press, Harry was frustrated over certain assets once discussed in connection with his and Meghan's post-royal foundation. These assets, believed to include private shares and jewelry from Diana's collection, were allegedly reabsorbed into the royal portfolio. Harry felt betrayed. Charles felt threatened. And in that emotional standoff, something broke. Sources claim Charles decided that night that all assets tied to the crown, from heirlooms to estates, must remain solely within the line of succession. No exceptions. No compromises. When aides questioned whether this meant excluding Harry entirely, Charles reportedly replied, "Harry made his choice. My duty is to protect the monarchy." A cold sentence, delivered with the kind of royal detachment that defines power and heartbreak. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because according to palace insiders, Charles's hidden will didn't just reassign assets. It allegedly included a contingency clause, one that shocked even his legal team. If Prince Harry were to challenge the crown's inheritance decisions publicly, he would forfeit all remaining private trusts connected to the late Queen's estate. Yes, that means not only would Meghan receive nothing, but Harry himself would lose access to funds once safeguarded for him since childhood. Can you imagine that level of royal coldness? The father using legacy as leverage to silence his son? And yet, as cruel as it sounds, this is exactly the kind of strategic precision that defines royal survival. The monarchy doesn't simply react, it fortifies. It adapts. It protects itself from within. But even then, there was one problem Charles couldn't control: emotion. Because locking away assets is easy. Locking away guilt? Impossible. Those close to the king say that after finalizing the directive, Charles became withdrawn. He canceled engagements. He stopped responding to Harry's messages. He reportedly told an aide, "Every choice I make as king costs me something as a father." And yet, Even amid that guilt, the crown came first. It always does. Meanwhile, word of the directive began to leak, not through official channels, but through the whispers of staff who'd seen the atmosphere shift. Late-night calls, sealed envelopes marked private to HRH. Princess and arriving unannounced at Clarence House. It didn't take long for speculation to explode. Was there a hidden will? A secret succession order? Why were certain assets suddenly being audited? One rumor even claimed that a specific property in Balmoral, a small estate Charles once promised Harry, was quietly reclassified as heritage-owned, meaning it could no longer be personally inherited. Another claimed that Charles's legal team was tracing the origin of funds linked to the late Queen's private accounts, ensuring that none could be claimed by non-working royals. But perhaps the most symbolic shift came with Diana's legacy. Remember that sapphire and diamond brooch Meghan once admired, the one reportedly passed through Diana's collection? Insiders now claim that item was reassigned to Princess Charlotte's trust, a future queen's heirloom, taken from a Duchess in exile's dream. If that's true, it's not just financial warfare, it's poetic revenge. Still, what makes this situation so emotionally charged isn't just the decisions, but the secrecy behind them. Because Harry, according to sources, didn't learn about the changes from his father. He learned through a third party, a friend of a royal aide who accidentally mentioned inheritance restructuring during a social gathering in London. Imagine hearing that your father rewrote his will, not from him, but from gossip. Harry reportedly confronted Charles via phone, demanding an explanation. The conversation, according to one witness, began with anger and ended in silence. And that silence said everything. One insider described the king's demeanor as stoic but devastated. Another said Harry's voice cracked halfway through as he told his father, "Mum would never have done this." To which Charles, weary and defensive, allegedly replied, "Your mother never had to be king." That's the monarchy in a single sentence: love versus duty, heart versus survival. But this wasn't just an emotional divide anymore. It was legal, tangible, permanent. For decades, royal inheritance had followed a predictable pattern. Assets passed quietly from monarch to heir, trusts preserved for future generations, and disputes kept firmly within palace walls. But now, with Harry outside the fold and Meghan firmly rooted in California, the entire structure was being redefined. Princess, and ever the strategist, saw the move as a necessity. She believed that Harry's growing independence and Meghan's Hollywood influence threatened the monarchy's sacred divide between public duty and private gain. She told aides, "The crown isn't a commodity, it's a covenant." And to her credit, that belief runs deep, and has never sought personal wealth from her royal status. She rides horses, wears the same coat for 20 years, and famously refused royal titles for her children. She understands the monarchy as duty, not lifestyle. So to her, keeping inheritance within the working line wasn't cruelty. It was preservation. But to Harry, it was betrayal dressed as tradition. And the emotional toll was immense. Friends say Harry felt erased, like his entire legacy had been written out of royal history. The idea that even Diana's heirlooms, the tangible memories of his mother, were being filtered through Catherine's line, not his, reportedly left him shaken and furious. He told one confidant, "It's not about money, it's about memory." Still, the monarchy saw it differently. To them, sentiment doesn't build survival. Structure does. Behind the scenes, palace courtiers began preparing for public leaks. Media advisors drafted potential statements, denials couched in vague language. No official confirmation regarding His Majesty's private affairs, one version read. Any inheritance-related speculation remains unfounded. Unfounded, maybe in public, but inside the palace, everyone knew something monumental had shifted. Even Princess Catherine, who normally avoids controversy, reportedly found herself in an uncomfortable position. According to one insider, she asked William whether they should distance themselves from the inheritance issue. His reply was curt, "It's not ours to discuss. It's father's to decide." But Catherine's silence spoke volumes. Because she, more than anyone, understood what this would mean for the public's perception of the royal family. Another fracture in an already fragile image. And she wasn't wrong. When word of the alleged will reached the tabloids, the headlines wrote themselves. King's Hidden will freezes out Harry, Catherine to inherit key Diana jewels, and in Charles' seal line of succession. The palace scrambled to downplay it, but the damage was done. The public began to ask questions, not just about fairness, but about forgiveness. How could a father exclude his own son so completely? But here's where the real twist lies. A royal insider recently claimed that among the sealed documents, there exists a handwritten note, not part of the legal directive, but tucked alongside it. A note addressed to my sons. No one outside that inner circle knows what it says. But according to whispers, the contents reflect both guilt and finality. One aide described it as part farewell, part confession. Could this note be Charles's attempt to explain his actions, or to ask for understanding that will only come after he's gone? No one knows. But one thing's certain. That note could become the emotional centerpiece of the monarchy's next great reckoning. And the most fascinating part? Princess Anne is said to have read it. Yes, the same sister who advised him to lock the assets away, who's now rumored to be the keeper of that letter. Which begs the question, what did she read that changed her expression, that made her go silent for days afterward? Because according to one palace insider, Anne looked shaken, as if she'd seen something that would break the family if it ever came out. What could possibly be in that note that even the Princess Royal, the strongest of them all, couldn't handle? Whatever it is, it might explain why she's taken such an unflinching stance in this inheritance battle. Not out of greed or control, but perhaps out of fear. Fear that the king's final words could expose something the monarchy can never publicly admit. And that's where our story turns next. Because while Charles was signing directives in private, Princess Anne was already making moves of her own, and the next decision she made would send tremors through the entire royal bloodline. But what she did next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. If the monarchy were a machine, Princess Anne would be its engine, quiet, unyielding, and absolutely essential. She doesn't chase headlines. She doesn't play to the cameras. But when something threatens the stability of the royal family, she becomes the iron wall no one dares to push. And that's exactly what happened when the whispers of King Charles's hidden will reached her ears. According to palace insiders, Anne was one of the few people fully briefed on her brother's secret inheritance directive. She had read every line, every clause, and every name, and she was the one who made sure it could never be challenged. But here's what most people don't realize. Anne didn't step in because she hated Meghan. She stepped in because she feared what the monarchy was becoming. To her, Harry and Meghan's departure wasn't just Megxit. It was a crack in the dam, one that could flood the institution if left unchecked. And the inheritance dispute? That was the water beginning to pour through. She saw what her mother built being undone, said one former aide, and may not crave power, but she knows how fragile it is. So when King Charles confessed his doubts, torn between paternal love and royal duty, and didn't hesitate, she reportedly told him, "You can't be a father right now. You have to be the king." It sounds cold, but that's Anne. She's the monarchy's most disciplined warrior, a woman who wakes before dawn, attends more engagements than any other royal, and expects nothing in return but order. And when the family falls into chaos, she doesn't comfort. She commands. Her intervention began quietly. A closed-door meeting at Clarence's house. No public calendar entries, no official notes. Just Anne, the king's private secretary, and the Lord Chamberlain. The topic, securing the continuity of the crown. To ordinary ears, it sounded bureaucratic. But behind that phrase was something much more personal, protecting the royal family's assets from external risk. External risk. That was the phrase used in the internal memo circulated afterward. It was never signed, but the message was unmistakable. Meghan Markle was the risk. Was it paranoia? Or strategy? Because from Anne's perspective, Meghan represented something the royal family had never faced before, a global, independent woman who knew how to use media, branding, and influence to her advantage. And that terrified them. It wasn't about Meghan being American. It wasn't even about her leaving the royal family. It was about what she took with her, the narrative, the story, the power to redefine what royalty meant to the world. And in the eyes of the monarchy, narrative is everything. So when Harry began inquiring about inheritance matters and saw danger, if Meghan gained access to even a fraction of royal financial details, it could become a weapon, a headline, a Netflix special, a book. Anne's logic was brutal but simple. If Harry and Meghan wanted freedom, they couldn't also want legacy. One palace aide recalled Anne's exact words during a private briefing. "You can't eat the cake and keep the crown." She wasn't being cruel. She was being consistent. Remember, Anne has lived her entire life watching her family tear itself apart from within. She saw her parents' marriage strain under public duty. She saw Charles and Diana implode under media scrutiny. She saw Andrew's disgrace drag the monarchy through the mud. And now, she saw Harry and Meghan repeating history, turning private wounds into public battles. So when Charles hesitated about finalizing his inheritance decisions and reportedly took the lead, she drafted recommendations for how to legally ring-fence the royal assets. In modern terms, she built a financial fortress. She suggested restructuring trusts under new entities tied to the Duchy of Lancaster, ensuring no outside party could claim access. She pushed for property transfers to be classified as national heritage holdings, locking them beyond personal inheritance claims. It was genius and ruthless. She was the architect of the firewall, one insider said. If Charles was the heart, and was the iron hand. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a boardroom operation. Emotion was bleeding through every decision. Because even as Anne was protecting the monarchy, she was watching her brother deteriorate under the weight of it. Those close to her say she noticed his exhaustion, the quiet guilt behind his eyes whenever Harry's name was mentioned. And maybe, in her own way, she thought she was saving him. But in trying to protect Charles, she might have doomed his relationship with his son forever. It all came to a head during a tense family meeting at Sandringham. The king, Princess Anne, and a select few senior royals gathered in the drawing room. The same room where, years earlier, the Queen had forced Charles to face his divorce from Diana. History repeating itself in whispers. Charles reportedly looked weary, his voice frail but firm. "This must end," he said, and didn't mince words. "Then we end it properly." She pulled out a folder, documents outlining the inheritance plan and legal protections. The air turned heavy. Prince William sat silently, arms folded. The courtiers shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew what these papers meant. The formal exclusion of Harry and Meghan from the Crown's private inheritance network. "This isn't punishment," Anne told the room. "It's protection." But the silence that followed said otherwise. Even William, the heir apparent, looked uneasy. He reportedly asked whether there was any room for reconciliation. Anne's reply was chilling. Reconciliation doesn't rebuild institutions. Boundaries do. It was cold logic. But she wasn't wrong. Because behind the emotion, Anne understood something the others didn't. The monarchy survives by control. Once you lose control, you lose everything. Still, there's a tragic irony in all this. And the woman determined to preserve the crown has become the lightning rod of its coldest moments. She was there when the Queen signed off on Diana's funeral arrangements. She was there when Charles took the throne. And now, she was ensuring that Harry's chapter was quietly erased. But here's where it gets fascinating. After the meeting, Anne reportedly requested a private audience with Charles. The tone was different. No advisors, no lawyers. Just a brother and sister who have seen more history than most historians could ever write. Witnesses said the conversation grew emotional. Charles admitted his fear that excluding Harry would make him no better than father. A clear reference to their strained memories of Prince Philip's rigid parenting. And placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're not him. But you have to be stronger than him ever was." That one line encapsulates everything about, and pragmatic compassion wrapped in royal steel. And yet, even she couldn't predict what came next. Because just days after the Sandringham meeting, word began leaking through palace corridors that Harry knew. Someone had tipped him off. Whether it was a sympathetic aide, a legal source, or even someone within William's circle, no one knows. But what's certain is that Harry's response was immediate. He called the palace directly, and this time, he didn't ask for his father. He asked for Princess Anne. That alone is extraordinary, and had been his aunt, his confidant during childhood. She'd taken him riding, defended him during his rebellious teenage years, and even offered quiet support after Diana's death. She was one of the few royals he truly respected. But when she answered that call, it wasn't the same relationship anymore. According to one insider, Harry's voice was shaking, not from anger, but from disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why are you helping him cut me out?" Anne's answer was brutal. Because I'm protecting you from yourself. Silence. Then she hung up. That moment, that one conversation, symbolized the end of the royal family's emotional glue. Because for Harry, it wasn't just an inheritance dispute anymore. It was a declaration of war. He reportedly told Meghan later that night, "If they think they can write us out, they've underestimated us." And from that moment on, the quiet inheritance matter transformed into a full-blown power struggle, one that would drag the monarchy into the harshest spotlight since Diana's death. But before it did, and made one more move, the move that shocked even her allies. She reportedly instructed royal legal teams to draft an additional memorandum, one that reclassified specific jewelry and estates, including pieces from the Queen Mother's collection, under Crown legacy protection, that effectively made it illegal to transfer or sell them outside the working royal family. Translation? Even if Charles wanted to make peace later, his hands would be tied, and had locked it all down, permanently. But her reasoning, according to insiders, wasn't just about control. It was about fear. Fear that once Charles passed, and if Harry returned to the UK claiming rights, the monarchy would face a scandal that could make Megxit look tame. "She's always 5 steps ahead," said one aide. "But sometimes, she plans for wars that haven't even started." Still, what Anne didn't realize was that her intervention had already lit the fuse. Because Harry wasn't about to walk away quietly. He'd started reaching out to legal experts in the United States, exploring whether any transnational inheritance laws could apply if Meghan was considered a beneficiary by marriage. That's right, Harry was ready to go global. And that terrified the palace. Because once a royal dispute leaves British soil, it stops being private. It becomes entertainment, scandal, content, which meant the monarchy wasn't just fighting for its money anymore. It was fighting for its reputation. And right at the heart of it stood Princess Anne, the quiet warrior who had tried to stop a storm, only to become the one who unleashed it. But the next move didn't come from her. It came from Meghan, and what she did next would not only shock the palace, but force King Charles himself to question whether his sister had made the right call. Because when Meghan went public with her claim, she didn't do it through lawyers. She did it with something far more powerful, evidence. And that revelation would send the royal family spiraling into a crisis no one was prepared for. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started with a whisper, a rumor drifting from Montecito to Mayfair. Then, like a spark in a room full of dry parchment, it ignited. Meghan Markle wasn't staying silent anymore. For months, she had been painted as the outsider, the social climber, the actress who couldn't play by royal rules. But behind the walls of her California mansion, something else was brewing, something far more strategic. Because according to insiders, Meghan had proof. Proof that before she and Harry stepped down, she was promised access, even partial, to certain royal assets. Letters, documents, and personal correspondence that could expose a deal the palace never wanted made public. And the moment she hinted at that evidence, the entire royal machine went into panic mode. It began, as these stories often do, with a leak. A journalist from a respected London paper received an anonymous email. The sender claimed to have copies of correspondence between Buckingham Palace and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex regarding inheritance expectations and property arrangements. At first, it sounded absurd. The royals don't write emails. They barely write letters without an army of secretaries. But then, attached to the message, there were scanned images. Blurry, partial, but real enough to set off alarm bells. One of them allegedly showed a letterhead bearing the official monogram of Queen Elizabeth II. Another featured the signature of a senior royal aide. The content was vague, phrases like future provisions, mutual understanding, and estate consideration. Within 48 hours, the press went wild. Meghan Markle claims secret royal promises over inheritance, blared one tabloid. Palace denies any such deal, snapped another. But beneath the headlines, something more dangerous was unfolding, a quiet verification war. Inside royal circles, aides scrambled to determine whether those documents were authentic. The signatures matched. The timing aligned. The phrasing, hauntingly formal yet familiar, sounded exactly like the Queen's measured tone. If the letters were real, it meant the palace had once acknowledged, at least in writing, that Meghan and Harry would be financially supported after leaving royal duties. And that, legally speaking, opened the door for Meghan to claim she was owed compensation. To the monarchy, that wasn't just scandal, that was nuclear. But let's rewind for a second. When Meghan first joined the royal family, she wasn't naive. She understood the symbolism, the spectacle, and yes, the sacrifice. What she didn't understand, at least not at first, was how everything in the royal world is transactional. Every smile is calculated. Every gift comes with strings. Every promise has a loophole. So when Charles reportedly told Harry and Meghan that their future would be provided for, Meghan believed him. She believed those words were binding, not just emotional reassurance, but commitment. After all, this was the royal family, where even dinner seating is dictated by centuries-old precedent. If a king said something, surely it meant something. But the monarchy doesn't operate on sentiment. It operates on survival. And once Meghan and Harry stepped down, those words vanished like smoke. That's why, months later, when Meghan began compiling her personal correspondence, letters, emails, and even text messages, she wasn't doing it out of nostalgia. She was building a record that would one day defend her. Insiders say she kept everything: notes from private meetings, handwritten messages from staff, and even a personal letter allegedly sent by Queen Elizabeth herself during the couple's early days in Canada. One former aide who worked with the Sussexes recalled Meghan's meticulous habit. She would photograph every note, every card, every written exchange. She said, "History is written by those who keep receipts." Receipts indeed. When the inheritance rumors broke, Meghan's team remained publicly silent, but privately, they were methodical. They began reaching out to legal experts familiar with cross-border inheritance disputes. The focus? Determining whether any royal communication could be interpreted as a binding agreement. Meanwhile, palace aides tried to contain the damage. They framed the letters as courtesy correspondence, denying any legal implication. But that didn't stop the speculation, because one phrase from the leaked letters stood out like a thunderclap. Future provisions to be considered in alignment with the family's existing inheritance structures. What did that mean? Future provisions for what? And who authorized it? If the Queen herself used that phrase, it could imply she acknowledged Meghan's potential inclusion, even symbolically, in future royal financial considerations. That's the detail that reportedly sent Princess Anne into overdrive. She allegedly called an emergency consultation with the King's legal team, demanding an immediate audit of all private correspondence tied to the Sussex transition. Her exact words, according to one insider, were, "If there's a paper trail, we need to own it before it owns us." And understood something the others didn't. Once documentation leaks, the narrative belongs to whoever controls the evidence. And Meghan, it seemed, had plenty. But why release it now? Why not years ago? The timing was no accident. Charles's health, the inheritance rumors, the rising sympathy for Meghan among certain media circles, all converged at the perfect moment. To the palace, it looked like a strike. To Meghan's team, it was defense. Because if the monarchy was quietly reassigning assets, the same assets she believed were once promised to her husband, then she wasn't starting a war. She was protecting herself. Still, the optics were devastating. For the first time since Megxit, Meghan's name and inheritance appeared in the same sentence. A PR disaster the palace had spent years trying to avoid. The public narrative shifted again. Was she fighting for fairness or just fortune? But here's where the emotional twist comes in. Behind the headlines, those close to Meghan insist it wasn't about wealth. It was about recognition. One friend reportedly said, "She's not asking for castles or crowns. She's asking for honesty." For them to admit she was never treated equally, even in writing. That statement struck a chord, because buried beneath all the legal talk and scandal was something deeper, a woman who once believed she'd joined a family, only to discover she'd entered a fortress. And for Harry, watching all this unfold was agony. Insiders say he supported Meghan's decision to stand her ground, but he also knew what it meant: open war with his father and aunt. Every document released, every leak confirmed, widened the chasm between them. He reportedly told a friend, "They won't forgive her for this, and they'll never forgive me for standing by her." Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, chaos. Advisors debating statements, lawyers drafting cease and desist letters, and in pacing. furious that private royal correspondence was even being discussed publicly. She reportedly told aides, "You can't unring a bell. Once it's out, it's out." And she was right. Because no matter how much damage control the palace tried, the public had already chosen sides. Some viewed Meghan as manipulative, a Hollywood opportunist exploiting royal privilege. Others saw her as a whistleblower, exposing the monarchy's double standards and secret deals. Either way, she had forced the palace into a corner. And the most fascinating part? King Charles refused to comment. Not one word, not one statement. He stayed silent, dignified to some, guilty to others. But behind that silence, aides claim he was livid, not because of the money, but because Meghan had weaponized something sacred, the Queen's private words. According to one palace source, Charles slammed his desk during a briefing and said, "She's turned Mother's grace into ammunition." It's a haunting line, and maybe, in his mind, true. Because for Charles, his mother's letters were sacred relics, the last vestiges of her reign, her wisdom, her restraint. To see them now, twisted into evidence in a family feud, was unthinkable. But to Meghan, those same letters were her shield. And so began what insiders now call the paper war. Royal legal teams versus Meghan's private attorneys. Both sides dissecting language, debating implications, preparing for a possible confrontation no one wanted to see go public. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary. According to reports, one letter Meghan referenced wasn't from the Queen at all. It was from King Charles himself, written shortly after her first pregnancy, when relations between him and Meghan were reportedly warm. In it, he supposedly mentioned ensuring stability and future protection for the Sussex household. That's the phrase Meghan's lawyers highlighted. Future protection. Two words that could be interpreted as a commitment or a metaphor. But in law, words matter. And those two words could cost the monarchy millions. Behind the scenes, Charles's lawyers scrambled to reinterpret the phrasing. They argued it was emotional, not contractual, that the king's intent was paternal, not financial. Yet Meghan's camp wasn't backing down. She's not bluffing, one source close to her said. She knows what she has, and she's not afraid to use it. Still, what makes this all the more dramatic is what no one expected next. Because while lawyers battled in the shadows, Meghan made a move that no royal could have predicted, not even Anne. She authorized the quiet delivery of selected documents to a prominent international journalist, not for money, but for transparency. And that journalist, in an exclusive report, claimed the letters demonstrated acknowledgement from the Crown of certain personal commitments to the Sussex family's financial security. The story broke at dawn. London froze. Montecito celebrated. Within hours, royal advisors were on red alert. Phones rang. Statements were drafted. But the damage was irreversible. Because for the first time, the monarchy's private language, once protected by silence, was now public property. And it wasn't just Meghan's reputation at stake anymore. It was the king's. According to one insider, Charles's fury was unlike anything they'd ever seen. He reportedly told his staff, "She's forcing me to do what I swore I'd never do. Make it public." What did he mean? Was the king preparing to reveal the truth about those letters, or something even bigger buried within them? No one knows. But one thing is certain. The moment Meghan revealed her alleged claim, she triggered something the monarchy has always feared most: transparency. Because in the royal world, truth isn't told. It's managed, controlled, hidden behind velvet curtains and centuries of protocol. And now, one woman had dared to pull that curtain back. But what came next would make even this look small. Because as the world debated Meghan's documents, another voice entered the story, one that could destroy everything she was fighting for. A voice from within the palace itself. Someone who claimed to know exactly what those letters really meant and who they were truly written for. And when that revelation surfaced, it would change the entire inheritance war forever, and no one saw it coming. Montecito, that picture-perfect slice of California luxury, where the ocean meets the mountains and the silence costs millions. It's a place for the powerful to disappear. Oprah, Ellen, Gwyneth, and yes, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. To most people, Montecito is paradise. But inside the gilded gates of Meghan and Harry's estate, paradise had turned into a fortress. Because while the world saw yoga mats, chicken coops, and sunshine, What was really happening behind those glass walls was far darker, a battle plan. For months, Harry and Meghan had lived in a bubble of public smiles and private tension. The Netflix cameras were gone. The podcasts had fizzled out. The brand deals had cooled. What remained was something raw, survival. And as Meghan's alleged inheritance claim exploded across global headlines, Montecito became the nerve center of a war between California freedom and British power. But here's the part that few people know. This wasn't just emotional. It was financial. Because deep beneath the Montecito calm, a paper trail was forming. Investigators working for the Crown's legal team had begun quietly tracing transactions linked to properties connected to the Sussexes, donations, loans, and consulting fees from entities that once had loose royal ties. The question? Whether royal funds, directly or indirectly, had ever touched Meghan and Harry's California empire. If they had, it would give the monarchy grounds to argue that royal resources had been misused, making any inheritance claim look hypocritical. It was an ugly move. But make no mistake, this was chess, not checkers. One investigator described it this way. The palace didn't just want to win. They wanted to bury her credibility before the fight even began. And it almost worked. Because just as Meghan's camp was gathering momentum, leaks began surfacing about her finances. Tabloids hinted at mysterious property trusts, anonymous investors, and unexplained transfers tied to luxury renovations at the Sussex mansion. Were they real or planted? No one could tell. But the timing was suspicious. Days after Meghan's inheritance letters surfaced, a British journalist suddenly discovered documents linking the Montecito property to offshore entities once connected to a royal estate consultant. Coincidence? Hardly. The palace was fighting back, the only way it knew how, through controlled scandal. And the irony was almost poetic. The same monarchy that had accused Meghan of exploiting her royal connection was now using her California life as a weapon. Meanwhile, Meghan was furious. According to a friend, she told Harry, "They're trying to turn my home into evidence." She wasn't wrong. Because what had once been their sanctuary, their post-royal dream, had suddenly become the palace's favorite battleground. Drone photos of their estate resurfaced online. News outlets ran aerial maps showing property boundaries and security expansions. Even the chicken coop, once symbolic of simplicity, was mocked as Hollywood cosplay. It was relentless. And behind the scenes, Harry was cracking. Those close to him say he became paranoid about surveillance, convinced someone inside their circle was leaking details. He reportedly told a friend, "Every time we take a step forward, they pull us back into their world." But it wasn't just paranoia. Because something strange was happening. Emails from their financial advisors began bouncing. Legal correspondences were intercepted. Anonymous letters were delivered to their Montecito mailbox and signed, but chillingly specific about their movements. Someone was watching them. The question was who? Some believed it was the British tabloids, always hungry for Sussex dirt. Others whispered it was royal investigators, quietly building a case. But one theory stood out, that it wasn't London at all, that someone much closer was feeding information to the palace. The Sussex circle wasn't as tight as it used to be. Staff had come and gone. Contractors, nannies, assistants, people with access to schedules, emails, and private rooms. And one of them, according to reports, had ties to an old royal foundation. If that was true, it meant the palace had eyes inside Montecito. And that changed everything. Because now, this wasn't just about inheritance. It was espionage. Let's pause and think about that for a second. A royal family investigating its own exiled prince and his wife, across continents, across laws, across trust. It sounds like fiction, but insiders insist the tension was real. And the more the palace dug, the more the Montecito connection deepened. Investigators reportedly traced one specific property consultant who had worked on the Sussexes' estate financing. That consultant once handled projects linked to royal estates, including the Duchy of Cornwall. If that connection held, it could mean that the couple's mansion, their literal home, might be partially tied to the very institution they had fled. The symbolism was brutal. Harry and Meghan had escaped the monarchy, only to realize it might still own part of their foundation. But Meghan wasn't going to let that narrative stand. She launched a counteroffensive, subtle, strategic, and media-savvy. Through carefully chosen allies, she began reframing the story. Montecito wasn't just a home, it was a metaphor. A sanctuary built on self-reliance, motherhood, and modern independence. She gave interviews hinting at the peace of finding your own footing after chaos. She posted imagery of blooming gardens, children's laughter, sunlight. Every photo, every quote was a rebuttal. But beneath the calm veneer, the couple's lawyers were working overtime. They began quietly tracing the leak network, digital breadcrumbs, IP logs, and encrypted correspondence that could expose who was sharing information with the palace. What they discovered was stunning. A single encrypted email chain linked a Montecito contractor to a London-based communications firm, one with known royal clients. If verified, it would prove what Meghan suspected all along. Someone within her own walls was betraying her. She reportedly told a friend, "Now I know how Diana felt. Smiled at by strangers and watched by ghosts." It was poetic, tragic, and very real, because every move Meghan made from that point forward was done under siege. Harry, growing more agitated, considered relocating again, somewhere remote, like Canada or New Zealand. But Meghan refused. "Running makes you guilty," she said. "And I'm not guilty of anything." Instead, she doubled down. Behind closed doors, she and her team began preparing a new strategy, not just legal, but symbolic. If the palace was using property, assets, and money to define legacy, Meghan would use something far more powerful: story. She began drafting what insiders now call the Montecito Manifesto, a personal, emotional document that outlined her journey, her sacrifices, and her truth. It wasn't just a statement, it was a reckoning. She planned to release it at the perfect time, right when the monarchy thought it had silenced her. But before that could happen, something unexpected occurred. Because while Meghan was writing her truth in California, something very different was being written in London, a classified royal report analyzing her financial exposure. The report, according to one leak, contained damning speculation that Meghan's claim of independence might have been exaggerated, that certain payments, consulting deals, and family trust connections could have indirectly supported her lifestyle. It was a narrative bombshell, and when word reached Meghan, she was furious. "This is how they do it," she reportedly told a confidant. "They can't kill your truth, so they question your integrity." Her team prepared a fierce response, a legal rebuttal demanding transparency from the palace. They wanted names, evidence, receipts. But Buckingham Palace doesn't respond to demands. It responds with silence, and silence, in their world, is power. Still, there was something else, something that rattled even Meghan. Because in the course of investigating the leaks, her team stumbled upon something chilling: a communication between a financial intermediary in the UK and a royal estate accountant. The message referenced asset review adjustments concerning Sussex-linked trusts and was dated months before Charles's will was revised. In other words, the palace had been preparing to block her out long before the inheritance controversy became public. It wasn't reaction, it was premeditation. And that revelation flipped the entire story. Because now Meghan wasn't just the accused, she was the target. Her alleged inheritance claim wasn't a grab for wealth. It was an act of defense against a plan that had been set in motion long before she even knew it existed. And Harry? He was crushed. Insiders say he blamed himself for trusting his family, for not seeing the signs earlier. "They were never protecting me," he reportedly told Meghan one night. "They were protecting themselves from you." That line, bitter, broken, captures the core tragedy of this saga. Because beneath the glitz and headlines, this isn't just about inheritance. It's about love trapped between loyalty and legacy. And now, the palace and Montecito were locked in a silent standoff, two worlds mirroring each other across the Atlantic, each accusing the other of betrayal. But while lawyers argued and investigators pried, something else was about to erupt, something no one could control. Because one morning, a single anonymous package arrived at Buckingham Palace. Inside, photocopies of financial records, signed statements, and what appeared to be a handwritten note. The signature? Meghan Markle. And written across the top of the first page were 6 words that sent a chill through the palace corridors. "Return what was promised to us." Was it real? Was it planted? Was it bait? No one knew. But that package would trigger the most aggressive royal investigation in decades. One that would reach all the way back to Diana's legacy, and exposed just how deep the inheritance war really went. Because hidden in those documents was one name that shouldn't have been there at all, a name that would turn the fight from a family feud into a constitutional crisis. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. For years, Prince William had played the part perfectly, the calm heir, the steady son, the royal anchor who could be counted on to hold the family together when the storms rolled in. But behind that polished calm was a man on the edge. Because for the first time in his life, the brother he once protected had become his biggest threat. And it wasn't just about family anymore. It was about survival, his, the monarchy's, and everything their grandmother had built. When news broke of Meghan's alleged inheritance claim, and worse, the leaked letters, William was livid. Not furious. Fractured. According to a senior aide, he stormed into a private meeting at Kensington Palace, slammed a stack of newspapers on the table, and shouted, "He's turning this into a war, and he's dragging all of us down with him." Those who know William say they had never seen him like that before. This wasn't the composed Duke of Cambridge giving calm press statements. This was a man watching the foundations of his birthright crumble in real time. Because every headline, every scandal, every leak didn't just hurt Charles. It hurt him, the next king, the one supposed to represent the future. And as the inheritance story spiraled, it wasn't Meghan who the tabloids demanded answers from. It was William. What will the next king do about the Sussex scandal? That's the curse of the heir. Even when you're not involved, you're guilty by blood. Inside the palace, William's patience finally snapped. He reportedly told his advisors, "Enough diplomacy. It's time to remind them who still carries the crown." And from that moment, his tone changed. For years, he'd taken the moral high ground, ignoring interviews, ignoring attacks, ignoring the Netflix specials that painted him as cold and jealous. But when Meghan's claims threatened to stain the royal inheritance, the very system he would one day control, he drew a line. "This isn't about money," he said. "It's about the monarchy itself." But not everyone agreed. Privately, Catherine, his ever-composed partner, urged restraint. She understood the optics. "Every reaction feeds their narrative," she told him. "Silence is safer than anger." William listened, and then ignored her advice. Because anger was all he had left, he reportedly began making unannounced visits to Clarence House and Sandringham, personally meeting with senior advisors and estate managers to ensure that no Sussex-linked assets remained within royal records. In one heated discussion, an aide recalled him saying, "I don't care what it costs. I want their name removed from everything tied to this family's legacy." It was drastic. It was emotional. It was the breaking point. But here's where things got truly complicated. Because William's anger wasn't just about the money, or the headlines, or the monarchy's reputation. It was about something far more personal, the feeling that his brother had weaponized their mother's memory against him. Ever since Harry and Meghan invoked Diana's name in interviews, documentaries, and speeches, William had grown increasingly resentful. To him, their mother's memory was sacred, not a brand. And now, with Meghan's alleged letters referencing Diana's legacy and fairness within the family, William saw red. "This isn't legacy," he reportedly told a friend. "This is exploitation." It was like watching an old wound ripped open in public, one that had never truly healed. Because deep down, William still carried the scars of that night. The night he and Harry lost their mother. The night the cameras flashed outside a Paris tunnel. And now, decades later, those same flashes had returned. Except this time, it was his brother holding the match. Insiders say William began distancing himself from nearly everyone who suggested reconciliation. He stopped returning Harry's calls. He even refused to participate in joint charitable initiatives that had once been planned as a bridge between brothers. One royal aide described it simply. William shut the door and locked it. Still, there was one person he couldn't shut out, Princess Anne. She was the only one who could talk to him without pretense. She didn't coddle. She didn't console. She confronted. During a private dinner at Balmoral, and reportedly told him, "You can't lead with emotion. You'll end up like Charles, trapped between love and duty." William's response was chillingly direct. "Maybe it's time duty wins." That was the moment and realized her nephew was no longer the boy who idolized his brother. He was a man hardened by betrayal, ready to rule like a soldier, not a son. But even she couldn't have predicted what he would do next. Because while the palace was still scrambling to contain Meghan's document leaks, William began orchestrating something of his own, a quiet, behind-the-scenes campaign to reinforce his image as the unshakable heir. He launched new initiatives, increased public appearances, strategically invited sympathetic journalists to private briefings. Every photo, every handshake, every speech was designed to contrast the chaos of Montecito with the calm of Kensington.